Cambridge had never looked more beautiful. It was the kind of spring morning that felt like it had been custom-made just for her. Karen Edu stood still in the center of King's College courtyard, the sunlight weaving gold into her robe. Her black doctoral gown flowed softly in the breeze, the deep blue sash of her pharmacy degree resting gracefully over her shoulder. Around her, flashes of laughter and cheers blended with the rustle of petals falling from the trees. Everyone was celebrating. But Karen wasn't smiling just for the degree. She was searching, scanning. And then, her breath caught. There he was, Khalifa Andrews. He stood by the stone archway under the historic bell tower, surrounded by a few professors and fellow graduates. But to her eyes, he was standing alone in the middle of everything, like a prince in a world that had been waiting for him to arrive. His tall frame was clothed in an ash-gray suit that curved perfectly against his build. He didn't smile much, didn't say much. He simply stood there, holding his certificate in one hand, nodding every now and then, completely unaware of the effect he was having on her heart. Karen's fingers tightened around her own certificate. She took a step forward, then stopped. He turned. Their eyes met. From across the courtyard, through the flurry of caps, gowns, and celebration, they just looked. Seconds passed. Maybe minutes. Time had a funny way of bending when it came to Khalifa Andrews. Karen's chest rose slowly as though the air had become too heavy to breathe. Her hazel brown eyes locked on his face. His dark, solemn gaze, the set of his jaw, the faint furrow of his brows as though he were trying to place something. Did he see her? Or was she imagining it? And then it happened. His gaze lingered. Just a little longer than necessary. Her stomach fluttered. He looked away first. Karen stood frozen, unsure what that meant. Had he recognized her? Had he even noticed her at all? Or was she just a blur in his periphery, like she'd always been? Her parents approached then, wrapping her in hugs and praise. Friends called out for photos, but Karen's thoughts stayed with the man at the archway. She turned her head one more time. But he was gone. Just like that. Lagos, 5 years ago. It was the kind of Saturday that came with no rules. The heat was high, the power was out, again, and the generator hummed a dull rhythm at the back of the compound. In the Edu residence in Ikoyi, Karen sat at the top of the stairs in an oversized t-shirt, pretending to read her biology notes. She couldn't concentrate. She could hear them. Maxwell and Khalifa. Laughing, talking, arguing about something stupid like usual. Something about who scored more goals in FIFA. Karen's ears were trained on only one voice. His. Khalifa Andrews. God. She'd had a crush on him since she was 10. The boy who could charm her mom and annoy her dad. The one who treated Maxwell like a brother but treated her like, well, nothing. Like a kid who just happened to live in the same house. But she wasn't a kid anymore. At 15, her waist had narrowed, her cheeks had sharpened, and her mind, her restless, daydreaming, wicked little mind, was full of things no teenager should be thinking about her brother's best friend. But think them, she did. She heard the boy's footsteps move down the stairs toward the kitchen. Her heart skipped. She stood, moving slowly, barefoot on the tiles, peeking past the hallway wall. He was there. She exhaled shakily. Khalifa had grown into a man. He was taller now, built. His black joggers sat low on his hips, and his white tank top clung to his torso like second skin. He moved with the confidence of someone who didn't need to try to be noticed. Karen stood in the shadows, holding her breath. He opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of cold water, uncapped it, and drank deeply, the muscles in his throat moving with each gulp. And then, he paused. Her stomach dropped. Had he seen her? Khalifa's eyes slowly scanned the space beside him, toward the corridor where Karen stood half hidden behind the wall. He didn't flinch, didn't say a word, just held the bottle halfway to his lips and let his eyes linger for a moment too long. Karen wanted to disappear, but he didn't call her out. He just turned back toward the fridge, closed it, and walked away. She exhaled. Relief, embarrassment, maybe disappointment. She wasn't sure. What she didn't know was that later that night, Khalifa would lie awake in Maxwell's room, thinking about that split-second moment, that shadow in the hallway, those curious, careful eyes watching him like he was a mystery to be solved. He had noticed. Of course he had. Karen Idu wasn't invisible. Not anymore. But what could he do? He couldn't say a thing, couldn't make a move. Not with Maxwell so close. Not with that damn childhood oath hanging over his head. They had made a pact, a stupid, sacred, male-bonded promise under the mango tree behind the Idu house at 13 years old. No messing with each other's sisters. Ever. That was the rule. And Karen? She was the most off-limits thing Khalifa had ever wanted. But now that he'd truly seen her, seen the way she looked at him like he was made of starlight in danger, he knew something for certain. It was only a matter of time. The apartment lights glowed low and golden as Maxwell stepped in and tossed his keys on the marble countertop. The silence of the place greeted him like an old, judgmental friend. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the window panes of his luxury flat in Lekki Phase 1, Lagos, and he stood for a while, unmoving, eyes fixed on the skyline. But inside, a storm had already started. He leaned back against the wall and sighed, dragging a hand across his face. Karen. She had looked different at graduation. Not just older, not just more beautiful, colder, untouchable. Like a woman who had spent years building walls no one was allowed to breach again. And God help him, he knew why. It had always been her, from the moment they were kids. From the second he noticed her lingering too long in doorways when he visited. From the way her eyes sparkled every time he walked past. He had known, of course, he had known. And he had felt it too. But he had done nothing. Correction, he had done something. He had ruined everything. He walked to his bar and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, the kind his father used to call liquid courage. He didn't feel any braver as he sipped, just heavier. 5 years. They hadn't spoken in 5 whole years. Not since that day. It had been a late afternoon in Lagos, the sky a deep burnt orange, the kind that made shadows longer and hearts more exposed. Khalifa had come by for the weekend, same as always, and Maxwell had been upstairs on a call, working through some university paperwork. He remembered the way Karen had walked into the garden that day, timid, hesitant, like someone walking barefoot across glass. Khalifa had been sitting under the jacaranda tree, half listening to music through one AirPod, reading something medical and boring. And she had come to him. Maxwell would never forget the look on her face. Scared. And yet, so brave. She stood in front of him, hands trembling, lips quivering as though she were trying to choose between confession and escape. Her voice, when she finally spoke, had been barely more than a whisper. "I like you," she had said, not meeting his eyes. "I've liked you for a long time." Khalifa had looked up at her, startled, unprepared, and he'd panicked. His response wasn't cruel, but it was cold, too cold. "Karen, you're Max's little sister," he had said, standing and brushing invisible dust from his jeans. "This isn't right. You shouldn't say things like that." She had stood there for a few seconds, frozen. Her eyes had slowly filled with tears. She blinked them away before turning around and walking back into the house, spine straight, but spirit shattered. And he had let her go. Without explanation. Without kindness. Without honesty. Because the truth was that he wanted her too. He had wanted her for years. But their friendship, the pact with Maxwell, the line in the sand, it had all felt more important in that moment. He didn't know it then, but he had broken something in her that day. Not just her heart, her trust, her sense of worth, and she had never forgiven him. Back in the present, Khalifa sat down on the edge of his sleek, leather couch, the drink untouched now. He had kept tabs on her all those years, quietly, carefully. Her name was always on his lips when professors talked about brilliance. Her social media had been a ritual for him. He didn't comment, he didn't like, but he watched. Each time she posted graduation milestones, professional wins, or travel photos, it hurt and healed him at once. Because she had grown without him, flourished even. But every time he noticed there was still no boyfriend in the pictures, no tagged partner, no soft captions with heart emojis, his chest would unclench. His soul would breathe. Because even if he hadn't been man enough to choose her back then, he was selfish enough to hope no one else had taken what he still considered his. And he knew that was unfair. But when love is buried, it doesn't die. It waits. She had poured all her broken pieces into books and achievement. He could see it now, could almost hear the silent promise she must have made to herself. If I can't have him, then I'll become so successful he'll wish he did. And he did. He wished every day that he had made a different choice. He reached for his phone, thumb hovering over her contact name Karen Edu. Still saved. Still untouched. His hand dropped. Weird, he wasn't ready. Not yet. Because how did you apologize for something like that? How did you explain to a woman that the reason you rejected her love wasn't because you didn't feel it, but because you were a coward wrapped in loyalty? And that your loyalty destroyed the only thing that ever made you feel alive? If only she had known. If only she knew that she had never been alone in that feeling. Not even for a moment. Karen Edu zipped up her lab coat in front of the mirror, smoothing down the lapels with clinical precision. Her badge glinted under the cool fluorescent lights of the consultant locker room. Dr. Karen Edu, PharmD, printed neatly beneath the hospital's bold blue logo. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had packed her things for Lagos 6 weeks ago. The plan was simple: return home and assume her role as executive pharmacological director of her father's pharmaceutical empire. It was the least she could do for the man who had given her the world, who had invested in her degrees, in her dreams, in her silence. But before Lagos, she needed air. London was still home in a way. It held her memories, her heartbreak, her self-reclamation. So she stayed. And when the opportunity came, when St. Anne's Medical Institute offered her a 1-year contract as a top-tier pharmacological consultant, she accepted without blinking. It was the best hospital in the city, one of the best in the country, known for its high-stakes surgeries and complex patient care. Karen thrived. Her colleagues respected her. Patients trusted her. And every time she walked into a room, people listened. She was no longer Maxwell's kid sister or the invisible girl in the hallway. She was the storm now. That same morning, across the hallway in another wing of the hospital, Khalifa Andrews pulled on his surgical scrubs, already halfway into work mode. His phone buzzed on the bench beside him, the familiar name flashing on the screen, St. Anne's Director of Surgery. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was already here. After months of declining their offers, Khalifa had finally said yes. Not because he wanted to stay in London permanently. He didn't. But something had been pulling at him, whispering in his gut. Don't go yet. There's something you've left undone. And so he stayed. Because St. Anne's had been practically begging him to come on board, his surgical track record flawless, his reputation legendary. At 31, he was a neurosurgeon whose hands had already saved more lives than most could hope for in a lifetime. Still, he felt incomplete. Until this morning. The emergency call came in at 7:14 a.m. A patient in need of an immediate 12-hour brain transplant procedure. Rare, delicate, a surgical masterpiece. Khalifa was already scrubbing in when he realized the OR was missing key pharmaceutical agents required to stabilize the patient post-op. "Where the hell is pharmacy?" the lead nurse snapped into her comms. "They're sending the head consultant directly," someone replied. He barely looked up. Boots squeaked behind him, the sound of fast steps, the scent of mint and lavender. And then, collision. She crashed into his chest, hard, her tablet nearly slipping from her hands. He instinctively reached out to steady her. And then time froze. Karen's eyes widened. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. That scent, it was so damn specific. A warm, musky wood and citrus blend that clung to her memory like perfume on a pillowcase. Khalifa. Her stomach twisted. 5 years. 5 long years. And yet in that moment, her body still remembered him. The way he stood. The width of his chest. The heat of his skin. And when she finally looked up, he was already staring. Like he'd been hit by a truck. "Karen," he whispered. His voice cracked like a page tearing in half. Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. She hated that her throat went dry, hated that he still had that effect on her, that her knees felt weak, that her heart, her damn traitor of a heart, still danced to the sound of his voice. He stepped closer, slowly as if afraid she'd vanish. "You, look," he started, swallowing thickly. "Breathtaking." She blinked. 5 years ago, he barely saw her. Now he was calling her breathtaking? Her heart twisted with rage and longing all at once. He looked overwhelmed, undone even. His eyes roamed her face, as though trying to memorize her anew. He opened his mouth again, urgency creeping in now. "Karen, thank God I found you here. Maybe it's fate. Maybe it's something telling me I've been a fool." She folded her arms, trying to guard her expression. "I know you hate me," he said softly, stepping even closer. "And you have every right to. What I said to you that day, how I handled it, I carry it with me every single day. But please." A nurse popped her head through the OR door. Dr. Andrews were ready for incision prep. He glanced at her briefly, then back to Karen. His voice dropped lower. "I'm about to go into a 12-hour surgery, but as soon as I step out of that theater, I'm coming to find you. Please, just give me 10 minutes. Grant me that, Karen. Please." She was still frozen, caught somewhere between fury and heartbreak, between the ghost of a girl in a garden and the woman standing here now. Before she could answer, he gave her one last desperate look. And then he was gone. Through the OR doors, into surgery. Karen stood there long after the door swung shut. The hallway buzzed around her, nurses rushing by, pagers ringing, machines beeping. But her heart wasn't moving. The audacity of him. The sheer, maddening audacity to show up now, after all these years, after she had rebuilt herself from scratch, and speak to her like no time had passed. Like her pain wasn't valid. Like he hadn't crushed her once. And yet, her hands trembled slightly. Because she had waited for him. Longer than she wanted to admit. And now he was here. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was closure. Or maybe it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. By the time Khalifa walked out of surgery, exhausted but triumphant, Karen was gone. The surgical team buzzed with adrenaline, still reeling from the success of the 12-hour brain transplant. Nurses high-fived. The attending clapped him on the back, but none of it registered. He pulled off his gloves, removed his cap, and barely glanced at the chart in his hand. She wasn't waiting. Not in the hallway. Not by the nurse's station. Not anywhere. For a moment, panic squeezed his chest, but then his eyes fell on a note tucked into the pocket of his locker. "Dr. Andrews," it read in elegant handwriting. "I've gone home. I asked my assistant to leave you this. I thought it'd be rude to disappear without a word. I assume you know how to find me. Karen." He didn't hesitate. It took him 20 minutes to get to her place in South Kensington. The sky had darkened, and light drizzle fell like a whisper over the quiet street. His heart thudded as he knocked on the wooden door of her flat. When it opened, Karen stood there barefoot, wearing a soft gray lounge set. Simple, elegant, heartbreakingly casual. Her hair was tied in a loose bun, and her face, though bare, was radiant in the glow from the hallway light. "Khalifa?" she asked, surprise slipping into her voice. "I need to talk," he said, breathless. "But not here." She raised a brow. "It's past 9 p.m. There's a quiet little restaurant 2 blocks down." "They're still open," he said quickly. "Just put on your coat." "Please." She hesitated. He looked desperate, and part of her hated that she still cared. "Fine," she muttered, disappearing briefly before returning in a black trench coat and low-heeled boots. They walked in silence. The restaurant was warm, softly lit, with gentle jazz humming through the air. They were seated in a corner booth, away from the few other late diners. Khalifa sat across from her, elbows on the table, fingers laced together. He looked at her, but not quite. His eyes darted from her hands to her lips, to the salt shaker beside her. Anywhere but her eyes. Karen sat back, arms folded. "Well," she said. He inhaled deeply. "I'm sorry. For everything." "Be more specific." He flinched. "For that day in the garden, for the years after, for never saying anything, for pretending you didn't exist when all I wanted was to be near you." She stared at him, face unreadable. "I didn't know what I wanted back then," he continued, voice low. "You were young. I was confused. You were Maxwell's sister. That made you off limits. And yet you dated every girl with a pulse," she said flatly, "and were kind to them. You smiled. You laughed. You treated them like they mattered. But me?" He looked up slowly, finally meeting her gaze. "You didn't even say hi," she said, the emotion cracking through her voice. "I would walk past you, and you'd act like I was invisible. I wasn't some silly little girl with a school crush, Khalifa. I loved you. I still—" She stopped herself, bit her lip. "I asked myself every single day, what did I do wrong? Why did you hate me so much?" His face crumbled. "I didn't hate you, Karen." "Then why?" "I hated me." He rubbed his palms together, then dragged them down his face. "You were too good," he said softly. "Too brilliant, too brave, too beautiful. And you saw me. Not just the charming guy people clap for. You saw the insecure parts, the broken parts. I thought, you deserve better." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You should have let me decide that." "I know," he whispered. "And what was worse," she said, voice barely audible now, "is that you made me feel like I wasn't enough. Like I wasn't even worth being rejected properly. You crushed me, Khalifa." "I know," he repeated, eyes misty, "and it's haunted me, every day." He exhaled sharply. "There's one more thing." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. "I made a promise to Maxwell," he said. "Back when we were 13, we swore never to date each other's sisters. It was stupid, childish, but I took it seriously. I couldn't betray him, and breaking that promise, even in thought, tore me up inside." Karen sat up straighter. "You had no right to choose for me." "I know. I knew what I wanted. I still do." He stared at her for a long, painful beat. "Karen," he said, voice raw, "you never left me. Not in my head, not in my heart. I've spent years pretending you didn't matter, because if I admitted the truth, it would ruin everything I built. But I'm tired." He leaned forward across the table. "I'm tired of fighting it, tired of living without you." And before logic could intervene, before guilt or fear or the ghosts of broken promises could rise between them again, he reached for her and kissed her. Right there, in that quiet corner booth with the jazz playing low and the lights dimmed to gold, Khalifa Andrews kissed Karen Edu, and the years collapsed. The silence, the pain, the pretending. It all shattered in that one stolen moment. Her lips didn't move at first, but then they did. Because despite everything, despite the ache and the anger, her love had never died. The moment his lips touched hers, the world seemed to pause, like the universe had been waiting for this exact alignment all along. Karen let him. She didn't fight it. She didn't pull away. Because in that kiss, in that press of lips and breath and history, was everything she had ever longed for. This wasn't just chemistry. It was years of bottled-up emotion, of hidden stares and silent heartbreak. It was every lonely night she had cried into her pillow, every moment she whispered his name under her breath, and then hated herself for doing it. This was Khalifa, the boy who had stolen her heart, the man who had unknowingly shaped the woman she became. And now here he was, finally seeing her, finally reaching for her, finally tasting the truth they had both buried. Their kiss deepened, and she responded like her soul had memorized him. She let herself fall, just for a moment, into the fantasy she had dreamt of 1,000 times. But she still had sense. With one hand on his chest, she pushed gently. Khalifa. He rested his forehead against hers, panting slightly. I know, he said. We shouldn't. Not here. His voice was breathy, husky, torn between restraint and desire. They were in a public restaurant after all. Even tucked into a quiet corner, the intimacy between them had already turned too electric. He looked into her eyes, searching. Would you come back to my place? Karen paused. Not because she didn't want to, but because this was real now. This was no longer a dream. Yes, she whispered, and that was all it took. The ride to his flat was quiet, comfortably so. The air between them felt heavy with anticipation, charged with the kind of silence that didn't need words. Khalifa's flat was a sleek penthouse overlooking the Thames. Minimalist, masculine, tasteful. Exactly like him. Black leather furniture, polished floors, shelves filled with medical journals and jazz vinyl. Karen stepped in, her coat falling off her shoulders. The door clicked shut behind them. He didn't wait. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. This kiss was different, hungrier, deeper. Like he was trying to make up for every second he had lost, not loving her the way she deserved. Her fingers curled into his shirt. His hands were firm against her waist, then softer against her back. They moved together slowly at first, then urgently, as if time itself had grown impatient. She whispered his name like a prayer. Khalifa. And he kissed her again, on her neck, her collarbone, every inch of her that trembled under his touch. Khalifa stopped breathing until her forefinger touched his nipple, and then his hands shot up to cover hers. I want you, he said. Her eyes flicked downward, and her lips curved ever so slightly. I know. He turned her around, and the heat of the fire was against her back. A hand seized one of her breasts, a mouth fastened on the tip of the other. But suddenly she lost her balance and fell backward, while he opened her legs and gently spread her lips. Hair grazed the insides of her thighs. Just touch me, she whined, arching impatiently against his hand. He couldn't make either of them wait any longer. Slowly he brought his middle finger down and slid it gently over her folds. Jasmine threw her head back. God, yes, keep going. He did it again, this time his fingertips slipping between and gathering her wetness. He parted her with 2 fingers and found her clit, rubbing it in small circles. She cried out against his lips and was lost. The taste of her, the smell of her, the feel of her so close against him, skin to skin. Time and space had no meaning anymore. There was only her. Shh, he said, pulling her up so they were face to face again. He slid his hands between her legs, positioning fingers and thumb the way she'd like. Except that wasn't right. She hadn't taught him. He'd figured it out together, how to make her come. He nuzzled against her, his lips on her neck, nibbling and kissing his way up to her earlobe, where she'd always been ticklish. Ooh, she whispered. Ooh, oh, she sighed, as he worked his fingers against the slick seam. And then she forgot to pose, forgot about trying to look good, and lost herself inside her own pleasure. Khalifa watched her squeeze her eyes shut as she clamped her thighs against his wrist and snapped her hips up. Once, twice, 3 times before she froze, all the muscles in her thighs and belly and bottom tense and quivering, and he felt her contract against his fingers. Before she could recover, he'd rolled her onto her back and slipped inside her. After the first thrust, he had to hold still, knowing that if he kept moving, if he gave himself up to the exquisite tightness, the heat, he would explode. When it was over, he held her. not out of obligation, but because he didn't want to let her go. Karen rested her head on his chest, their legs tangled beneath the sheets, her fingers drawing slow circles on his skin. And in the stillness of his arms, she felt peace. Real peace. Not the kind that came from career achievements or distant applause, but the kind that whispered, "You are seen, you are chosen, you are loved." She didn't remember falling asleep, but she woke up to the smell of coffee and lips brushing against her cheek. Karen blinked slowly, her lashes fluttering open to find Khalifa leaning over her, shirtless with a mug in one hand and a smile on his face. "Good morning," he said softly. She sat up slightly, pulling the duvet over her chest. "Did you sleep?" He nodded. "Only once you did." There was something in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Vulnerability, maybe, or peace, or fear. She wasn't sure. "Coffee?" he offered. She took it, their fingers brushing. "You look different," he said, sitting beside her. "How?" "Like a dream I've had so many times that I'm scared to wake up." Karen rolled her eyes gently but smiled. "That's dramatic. It's honest." They sat there for a while, sipping quietly, the morning sun filtering through the glass windows and painting their skin in light. Whatever this was, whatever would come next, it was real now. And neither of them could go back. They hadn't put a label on it. Not yet. But whatever it was, they both knew it was real. In the weeks that followed that night in his penthouse, Khalifa and Karen couldn't stay away from each other. They didn't even try. It was as if years of distance and denial had suddenly folded in on themselves. And now, nothing could keep them apart. They made love again. More than once. Once in her flat on a rainy Tuesday night, where she had pulled him in by the collar of his coat before the door even closed behind them. Once in his office, where the blinds were drawn, the lights dim, and she whispered his name into his neck between kisses. And once, God help them, in her office at the hospital. That one had nearly given her a heart attack. But being with Khalifa had become the sweetest kind of chaos. She was still Karen, the brilliant, polished, calculating woman in her white coat and sensible heels. But when he touched her, when he whispered her name like it was sacred, the rest of the world fell away. They didn't talk about what they were doing. They didn't have to. Their bodies already knew. But beneath the desire and comfort, something deeper had begun to stir. Something quiet and terrifying and beautiful. Love. And for the first time, it didn't feel one-sided. It was a Saturday morning when everything changed. Karen had just stepped out of the shower, towel wrapped around her chest, when she heard the front door unlock. Her heart leapt. Khalifa, obviously. She hadn't expected him this early, but he had a way of showing up just when she needed him. But when she stepped into the living room, dripping hair and bare feet on the cool tile, it wasn't Khalifa who turned around. It was Maxwell, her brother, her big brother, standing frozen by her entryway, suitcase still in one hand, staring wide-eyed at a very shirtless Khalifa Andrews walking in from the kitchen holding 2 mugs of coffee. The silence that followed was volcanic. Khalifa froze, color draining from his face. Karen clutched her towel tighter. Maxwell blinked. Once, twice. Then all hell broke loose. "What the? Khalifa!" he barked, stepping forward. "Are you serious right now? Maxwell, in my sister's house? Half naked? Have you lost your damn mind?" Khalifa set the mugs down slowly and stepped forward, palms raised. "Max, I can explain." "You better," he snapped, jaw tight with rage. "Because the last time I checked, we had a pact, a promise. You swore that you'd never touch her." Karen stepped in, towel and all, face blazing. "I'm not something he just touched. Max, I'm not your property." "Care, what the hell is going on?" "I love him," she shouted, chest rising. The room fell silent. Even Khalifa looked at her. "I have loved him since I was a teenager," she continued, voice breaking. "Since you both used to play FIFA and toss football boots in the living room. And he knew. You knew. Everyone knew." Maxwell's expression softened. Just a little. I thought that was in the past. It never ended, she said. Even when he ignored me. Even when he broke me. It never stopped. She looked at Khalifa and her voice lowered. And now, he sees me too. Maxwell ran a hand through his hair, pacing, still visibly reeling. Khalifa stepped forward. Let me talk to him, please. Karen nodded. Take it outside. They sat on a bench just outside her apartment building, the morning still gray with mists and silence. Khalifa spoke first. I messed up, he said. I should have told you from the beginning. I should have come to you like a man and asked for your blessing. Maxwell remained quiet. But I was scared, Khalifa added. Scared of breaking a brotherhood. Scared of losing you, and scared of losing her if I got it wrong. Maxwell let out a sharp breath. You really love her? I've loved her longer than I want to admit, Khalifa said. I tried to fight it. I buried it. But it never went away. And I swear on everything, Max. This isn't a fling. This isn't casual. I see my future when I look at her. Maxwell turned to him, eyes fierce. You made a promise. I know, Khalifa replied, voice low, and I broke it. But I'd rather lose a pact than lose her again. A long silence passed. Maxwell finally looked away, lips pressing together in thought. She's not a little girl anymore, he muttered. I know. And if you hurt her again, I won't. Maxwell sighed. I'm still pissed, but I've never seen her look at anyone the way she looks at you. Khalifa said nothing, but the relief in his chest came like sunlight. I'll try to get used to this, Maxwell muttered. But if I hear about any tears, you won't, Khalifa promised. Another pause. Just treat her right, man. I will, Khalifa said firmly. Always. And as they stood, two men bonded by years of friendship, and now by a woman who meant everything to them both. Something settled. The past couldn't be undone. But the future could still be rewritten. The return to Lagos felt different this time. Not because of the familiar scent of roasted corn on street corners, or the hum of Danfo buses weaving through traffic with reckless rhythm. It wasn't even the thick coastal air that clung to their skin as they stepped out of the airport. It was what they had come back with. A decision. A love no longer hidden. And the knowledge that by the end of this visit, everything could change. Karen glanced at Khalifa beside her in the waiting SUV. He looked calm, but she knew him too well now. His jaw was a little too tight. His fingers tapped lightly on his knee. He hadn't said much since they boarded the flight from London. You're nervous, she said softly. He exhaled and gave a half smile. Understatement of the year. Karen reached for his hand. They'll come around. I hope so, he murmured. But your father? My mother? That's two continents of ego in one sitting. Karen chuckled, then leaned back in her seat. She had already called ahead to inform her parents she was coming. She hadn't told them why. Not yet. Because even she didn't know how they'd react. They arrived at the Edu residence in Ikoyi first. It was still the same whitewashed mansion she'd grown up in. High gates, sprawling garden, carefully trimmed hedges. The air smelled like hibiscus and wealth. Her mother was already at the door, arms open. Karen, my baby. She hugged her tightly. You look full. In your face. Is that love or late-night snacking? Karen laughed. Both, maybe. Her father, Chief Idu, emerged from the sitting room, regal in his white native attire, gold wristwatch glinting beneath the chandelier light. He gave Khalifa a long, hard look. Khalifa, he said with a nod. Good evening, sir. You're not here just for work, are you? Karen smiled, heart thudding. She turned to face them both. Mummy, Daddy, there's something we want to talk to you about. 10 minutes later, the four of them sat in the expansive living room. The AC hummed gently, and Mother's bangles clinked softly as she reached for her wineglass. Oh, Karen cleared her throat. This might be a surprise, or maybe not, but Khalifa and I are together. Silence, heavy. Her father blinked, slowly. Her mother's lips parted, but no words came out. I've loved him for a long time, Karen continued, and we didn't plan for it to happen now. But it did, and we're serious. We came back because we wanted to tell you in person. Not hide, not sneak. We want your blessing. Still silence. Until finally, her father leaned back and folded his arms. I knew, he said simply. Karen blinked. You knew? He nodded. The way you looked at him when you were a teenager? I knew. I thought you'd grow out of it. Karen flushed. But you didn't, he added. And now he's here, like a man. He turned to Khalifa. You hurt my daughter before. I did, Khalifa said quietly, and I've hated myself every day for it. And now? I love her, fully, unapologetically. I'm not afraid of it anymore. Chief Idu studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then act like it. Be responsible with it. This isn't a fling. You marry her or you let her go with dignity. There is no in-between. Karen's mother finally smiled. Well, I suppose I should start preparing fabrics. I still have that gold lace I saved for something special. Karen laughed through the tears in her eyes. 2 days later, they visited Khalifa's family compound in Victoria Island. His mother, Mrs. Andrews, was everything Karen remembered. Stunning, poised, and intense. She wore a coral velvet IRO and buba that shimmered under the sunlight and greeted Karen with a polite kiss on the cheek. But Karen knew she wasn't easily impressed. So, she said, sipping Zobo in her glass cup, the two of you are finally doing what you should have done years ago. Karen blinked. You knew? Of course. A mother always knows when someone owns her son's attention. She turned to Khalifa. I'm glad you're done being stubborn. I am, he said simply. She leaned forward. Then make it formal, not just dates and whispers. Set a proper introduction. If you truly mean it, let the families meet. Karen held her breath. Khalifa reached for her hand. I do mean it, he said, and I'll do whatever it takes. Mrs. Andrews smiled. Then I welcome you, Karen. You're more than enough for my son. That night, back in the flat they were staying at temporarily in Banana Island, Karen stood by the window watching the city sparkle. Khalifa came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. How do you feel? He whispered into her hair. Like I'm finally breathing, she said. He turned her to face him, gently. We're really doing this, she nodded. I love you, Karen Idu. I love you, Khalifa Andrews. And just like that, what had once been forbidden was finally unfolding into forever. The smell of fried chin-chin and vanilla incense lingered in the Idu home. Karen sat on the edge of her childhood bed, now repainted in champagne tones, watching as her mother zipped up the last box of fabrics on the floor. This is all your fault, her mom said playfully, folding a glittering purple gel. I've been saving these lace wrappers for years. Now I'm forced to open the vault because of love. Karen laughed softly. You love him. I do, her mother admitted, but don't tell him. Let him keep working for it. The house had turned into a frenzy the moment the Andrews family confirmed the introduction ceremony date, the official meeting of both families. A declaration of intent, a prelude to a traditional engagement. In Nigerian culture, this wasn't just a step, it was a statement. And in this case, it wasn't just love on the line, it was legacy. Khalifa Andrews wasn't just any man. He was the future of one of Lagos's wealthiest dynasties. And Karen, she wasn't just anyone's daughter. She was a walking empire in her own right. So the air buzzed with more than excitement. There were whispers, tensions, expectations. At the Andrews compound in Victoria Island, Khalifa stood before his father's massive glass desk. Chief Andrews, never one for small talk, clasped his hands and looked him dead in the eye. You're sure? Khalifa nodded. I've never been more sure. You've known this girl since she had pigtails and freckles. I know. You dated socialites, celebrities, even that minister's daughter. I know. And yet, it's Karen. Khalifa smiled. It's always been Karen. His father studied him for a long moment, then leaned back. Your mother likes her. I know. That frightens me more than if she didn't, he muttered. Khalifa chuckled. Just do it properly, the chief added. Don't bring shame to this family. Not now, not ever. I won't. Good. Then tell your uncles to get ready. You know how these introductions go. We're not walking in there empty-handed. The week leading up to the ceremony was a blur of tailors, gold wrappers, beaded accessories, and logistics. Karen was measured at least 5 times for her ceremonial gown, an emerald green IRO in booba stitch with crystal beading that shimmered like stars in motion. Her best friend Ifeoma flew in from Abuja, yelling instructions at the decorators. Khalifa sent flowers daily, one for each year they'd been apart. I'm trying to make up for lost time, the card on day 5 read. Karen kept everyone. The day before the introduction, she sat with Maxwell in the garden of the Idu residence. He was quiet, thoughtful, wearing a white polo shirt and sipping palm wine like he was watching something far away. You haven't said much, she said. I'm still processing. You're not angry? He shook his head. I was. But seeing you two, it makes sense now. She smiled. You deserve this, he added. Just make sure he knows what he's getting into. Karen raised a brow. Excuse me? You're brilliant, difficult, slightly dramatic. He needs to stay on his toes. She laughed. He knows. Maxwell leaned back. Then I'm happy for you. And just like that, the one approval that mattered most, after their parents, was sealed. The morning of the introduction arrived like a blessing wrapped in gold. The Idu residence transformed into a palace of soft drapes, high-life music, and the scent of jollof and grilled catfish floating through the air. Karen stood in front of her full-length mirror, the emerald lace hugging her curves like it had been stitched by God himself. Her hair was braided into a regal updo, adorned with coral beads that glistened beneath her veil. You're breathtaking, her mother said, eyes misty. Karen turned. So this is real? Her mother nodded. This is the beginning of forever. The sound of talking drums signaled the arrival of Khalifa's family. Karen peered through the curtains just in time to see him step out of the lead SUV, wearing a wine-colored agbada so perfectly tailored he looked carved from velvet. His cap sat at an angle, his beard trimmed, his presence commanding. And then, he smiled, straight at her window, as if he knew exactly where she'd be watching from. Karen's heart did a full somersault. Inside, the room was full of tradition. Gifts were presented: yam tubers, crates of malt, palm oil, fabric, wine, and money, wrapped in ornate paper and arranged in baskets. The Andrews family spokesperson read their formal request. We come in peace, with hearts open and intentions true. Our son, Khalifa, wishes to take your daughter, Karen, as his wife. The room held its breath. Karen's father nodded. We receive you warmly, and we honor your request. Let love lead. The room erupted into applause. Women ululated. A talking drum rolled into rhythm. Karen was summoned to the center, her face covered with a sheer veil, her steps elegant and unhurried. When she reached Khalifa, she knelt before him. He removed her veil, revealing her face to a room that already adored her. And then he said it, quietly for her ears alone. You're everything I never deserved, and still, everything I'll spend my life earning. She smiled, tears threatening. You already have. They danced that evening like two souls who had waited a decade to find their rhythm again. And as the stars blinked overhead, surrounded by family, music, and legacy, Karen Idu and Khalifa Andrews began a new chapter. One where their love no longer needed permission. It only needed to be lived, loudly, boldly, and without apology. Love like this was rare. The kind of love that endures time, pride, promises, and even silence. And so when the Andrews and Idu families finally came together under one roof, not to argue or resist, but to plan joyfully, it felt like a miracle no one had expected, but everyone was grateful for. Gone were the stares, the silent judgments, the heavy conversations about what's proper. Now laughter replaced tension, music filled the halls, and the scent of celebration hung in the air like perfume. Khalifa and Karen were finally getting married, and everyone was happy. Maxwell, once the stone wall between them, had transformed into the chief planner, working tirelessly with Ifeoma and both families to ensure the ceremony would be as grand as their love. This kind of love, Maxwell had said during a toast one night, you don't fight it, you thank God for it. As wedding preparations swirled around her like a whirlwind of colors, lace and flowers, Karen noticed something strange. She was tired. Not the normal Lagos wedding stress kind of tired. The body is telling you something kind of tired. Her appetite shifted. Her sleep patterns flipped. And her heart? It fluttered every time she looked at Khalifa, not just with love, but with a secret growing quietly inside her. She took the test alone one morning, holding the stick with trembling hands, tears pooling in her eyes even before the lines appeared. Pregnant, she sat on the bathroom floor, stunned, and then she smiled. She told him that evening, when they were alone, tucked into a private dinner set up on the balcony of the Andrews villa. He had just poured her a glass of non-alcoholic Chapman when she took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "What's this?" he asked with a curious smile. "Your legacy," she whispered. It took a beat for the words to register. And then he froze. And then blinked. And then everything in his face broke open. His walls, his composure, even the tight control he usually carried like armor. "You're pregnant?" he asked, barely breathing. She nodded. He stared at her, wide-eyed as the sun dipped behind them, painting the sky gold and crimson. And then he exhaled, deeply, gratefully, and pulled her into the tightest embrace she'd ever known. "Thank you," he whispered into her neck. "Thank you for making me whole." He kissed her, tender and reverent, like she was a miracle he didn't deserve. And from that moment on, Karen was his queen. The wedding was a dream. Set in a sprawling garden at a private resort in EPE, the ceremony was a blend of tradition and elegance. Karen walked down the aisle in a champagne-colored dress embroidered with gold thread and coral beads. A veil of fine lace flowing behind her, like a river of silk. Khalifa stood waiting in a regal black agbada with gold embroidery, a soft smile on his lips and tears shining in his eyes. He couldn't take his eyes off her. Not during the vows. Not during the rings. Not even as the crowd erupted into cheers after the kiss. And when they were finally alone after the dance, the prayers, the feasting and singing, he whispered, "I would wait all over again, 1,000 times, just to be yours." She kissed him, smiling against his mouth. "You're mine now. No more hiding. No more waiting. No more promises left to break," he murmured. "Only ones to keep." They returned to London 2 weeks later, hand in hand, wedding bands glinting under the airport lights, hearts fuller than they had ever known. They resumed work, quietly, gently. Khalifa adjusted his surgical schedule to be home more often. So Karen worked from her home office while resting and preparing for their baby. They settled into a rhythm, one not built on tension or secrecy, but on presence, on trust, on ease. The flat was filled with flowers, books, laughter, and the occasional soft jazz playing in the background. Sometimes Khalifa would pause in the middle of brushing her hair or massaging her swollen ankles, just to say, "You made me better." And Karen would smile and whisper, "No, you just finally let yourself be seen." The soft hum of lullabies played from the Bluetooth speaker beside the crib. Karen stood barefoot in the nursery, swaying gently as she rocked their baby Zara Amara Andrews, 8 months old, and already the queen of their home. She was a perfect blend of them both, hazel brown eyes like her mother's, a calm intensity like her father's. And when she smiled, the whole house lit up. Karen kissed her daughter's curls and whispered, "You don't know it yet, baby girl, but you were born from a love that defied years." Outside, the London sky was misty and pale. Inside, the apartment pulsed with quiet joy. Khalifa entered moments later, still in scrubs, a tired but proud look on his face. He stopped at the doorway and just watched them, his wife and daughter, wrapped in gold light. 2 queens in one room, he said softly. Karen turned. You're home early. I swapped shifts. Wanted to be here before bedtime. He stepped in and kissed Zara's forehead, then Karen's lips. How was your day? He asked. She babbled a lot, and I think she tried to say dada, but it came out more like da-da-da. He beamed. Close enough. They both laughed, and Karen handed him the baby before slipping away to prepare dinner. Khalifa cradled his daughter, swaying like Karen had done. Your mummy was the fiercest thing I ever ran from, he whispered into Zara's ear, and the bravest thing I ever came back to. Later that night, after Zara was asleep and the dishes were done, they lay in bed together, bare feet tangled, hands joined. What do you think our next chapter looks like? Karen asked. Khalifa looked up at the ceiling, thoughtful. Quiet, soft, overflowing. She smiled. I like the sound of that. He turned to her, brushing a thumb against her cheek. I used to think our story was forbidden, but now I realize it was always just waiting for the right time. Karen leaned into his chest. And this time, she said, we're not wasting a single second. Outside, the London rain fell softly. Inside, they were home. Together. Always. The end. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.